Good afternoon, Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your hurricane outlook and discussion for Saturday, August 4th, 2012. The tropics is very busy. You may have heard that Florence out here is the third earliest time that we have reached the sixth named storm of the season, behind 1936 and the infamous 2005 season. Then, of course, we have Ernesto, and then this little weak surface trough here, which will not be a big problem, I do not believe. Let's take a look at Ernesto. Florence, really not an issue right now, so I'm going to focus on Ernesto, and I think for obvious reasons. Fairly recent satellite picture, decent convective burst near the center, definite more curved banding to the system today. You remember in the previous discussions it was just different blobs of thunderstorms. Now we're starting to see a more curved banded structure to Ernesto, and this is a sign that it is getting better organized as it moves through what we refer to as the gauntlet through here, the proximity to the islands and the landmass of South America. It is able to pull in air off of those land masses, and that helps to disrupt the circulation a little bit. That air is also drier. You have downsloping winds coming off of the elevated terrain here of the Greater Antilles, and that drier air gets pulled in, and that can help to limit intensification. But once it gets over to the central and western Caribbean and this region, I do believe, as the Hurricane Center points out as well, that it'll strengthen and become the second hurricane of the year. And we see the forecast track. Interesting that it kind of bends back a little bit here and then resumes a more west-northwest to northwest track right into the Yucatan, to the south of Cancun and Cozumel here, and then across the Yucatan into the extreme southern Gulf of Mexico. And I'm going to take a look at why I think this is plausible and explain a little bit about not worrying about the initial conditions of the system. One of the interesting aspects is, you see we have it plotted here. This comes from our client services site, and the feature forecast points over the tropical cyclone heat potential map. Yes, it's going to avoid more than likely the highest heat potential area, but it will be crossing over very warm water. Got a little bit of a gap right here. It's interesting. I wonder why these are out here. You know, I'd like to research that one day. What causes those areas? How come it's not completely filled in? Nevertheless, Ernesto going to pass over once it gets especially right here to the south and west of Jamaica. Very warm heat content, and then as it approaches the Yucatan, that heat content stays very steady, if not increasing just a little bit. So this is why it is going to be a problem, more than likely a hurricane for the eastern Yucatan. Alright, so looking at the GFS, don't worry about the initial conditions, that the model doesn't depict the storm correctly or anything like that. Even though we do see it here represented in the 500 millibar field, there it is right there, and we are looking at 500 millibars. This is about 18 to 20,000 feet in the atmosphere. A very good indicator, especially when we can see the storm reaching that level of the atmosphere, of where it will go. So let's look at the other players, the other puzzle pieces, if you will. Large area of Bermuda high pressure here, outlined by this 594 height line. Think of this as a topographic map of the atmosphere, and you're looking at tall mountains of air, if you will, with these large areas that I have outlined. And this makes up the subtropical ridge. There's a little bit of a weakness right in here, just a little bit, but that's so far to the north that it's not going to draw Ernesto into it. So as we move out in time, this is the current condition. This is what it looks like 24 hours from now. So this will be valid Sunday morning. Here is Ernesto, not necessarily showing up in the 500 millibar field, but it doesn't really matter. You have very strong ridging taking place over the western Atlantic and now over the central United States, the southern plains region, and that ridge and high pressure extends all the way down into the Gulf and the western Atlantic here. You got to remember, this is very much like looking at the atmosphere in 3 dimensions, that if this was a geologic map, you can see contour lines. If you know geology and geography, you have contour lines, and that indicates elevation changes. And you cannot steer one of these things into a mountain of air. It just doesn't work that way. These large bubbles of air are much more dense and massive than this relatively small and much more buoyant, like a ping pong ball butting up against a huge, dense-filled water balloon. The ping pong ball is going to bounce off of it and go wherever the water balloon shoves it. So if we go out to 48 hours, you see again Ernesto moving right along here in the Western Caribbean. Pretty good, strong, high pressure to the north, ridging across. Not going to allow it to just turn in like the H-Wharf model shows. And then at 72 hours, yes, it shows it very weak, not showing up in the 500 millibar field, but it doesn't matter. You see the ridge pretty well connected here, all across from west-northwest to east-southeast, generally speaking, and that's just like a roadblock, a wall. It's not going to allow it to just turn into that. Instead, it'll follow the southern part, the southern periphery of this ridge up here, and be steered into the Yucatan more than likely. And then if we go out to 96 hours, now we see Ernesto starting to show up in the 500 millibar field. Yes, there's a little bit of a weakness right here, but it's probably not going to be far enough north to feel that. It's already too far south, and it's just moving along with this narrow area of ridge. It's still down here towards the Yucatan. We're not seeing this in September, where you can have a big trough digging in like this that really erodes the ridge away, leaving a weakness for something to fall into. Just not that time of year. It's early August. The ridges over the Atlantic and the continent of the United States, the continent of North America, over the United States is still pretty strong. So then at day 5, you see it crosses into the Yucatan pretty solidly there. Now we do have this weakness here, yeah. So, you know, if for some reason all of this right here is wrong and Ernesto is sitting up here, then it's a completely different story, but I just don't see how that's going to happen. If we look at day 6, the ridge builds back in just enough here, ever so narrow at the mid and lower levels, that Ernesto just gets steered in and stays buried down here. But look what's coming in over on the right-hand side. There's Florence, and alive and well, so we'll have to see what happens. There's Bermuda, by the way, for reference. And then lastly, at day 7, this is as far out as I want to go. I can see the arguments that with the heights lowering right here, this is like a valley of air carved out. It's literally a trough in the upper atmosphere, the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere, that if Ernesto was up here, it could get pulled into this and head towards the central Gulf Coast states. But it's probably not going to be there, you see. It's more than likely going to be somewhere over the Bay of Campeche and then eventually make landfall in central Mexico. We do have to watch Florence, though, showing up rather nicely in the 500 millibar field, which indicates a fairly strong system as a large area of high pressure, strong area of high pressure builds to its north. Folks in Bermuda want to watch this, as it may be a player in your weather beyond a week's time. We'll have to wait and see. Alright, so there you go. I wanted to explain a little bit about how the steering patterns generally work. I hope you understood that. The bottom line, these big areas of high pressure, they are going to win out almost every time this time of year. And I think there's going to be enough of that bubble of warm air to push the more light ping pong ball of Ernesto down so that it impacts the Yucatan and eventually mainland Mexico. Now, with that being said, you folks along the Yucatan, you need to be getting ready potentially anywhere from Belize up to Cancun for possible hurricane conditions next week. I'll focus more on that in tomorrow's update to discuss what impacts may be coming along. Again, I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. Hope you learned something from this video blog. I'll have another one for you tomorrow.